I guess we're the only ones here today with a pink booth, but we're located outside, so we stand out in that sense. I mean, Tink is a Swedish fintech. We started in 2012, currently 140 people. We help banks gear towards open banking and the developments we see in that. PSD2, obviously one part of it, that being account aggregation, payment initiation, but we're also doing personal finance management and enabling data-driven sales, you can say. So pooling all information, gathering that into one place, crunching it, and then actually presenting it into something very actionable. And we've heard it before. It's not enough to just with a statement saying you spend a lot of money on X. People want an advice, something to that they can do to change the situation. So maybe presenting a product here, and you have a worse mortgage rate than average. Here's an average, or here's an alternative product for you. I mean, Tink was started basically with a vision of reducing financial anxiety, and a lot of people are very anxious about their finances. They don't take control of them because they don't know where to start. They think it's boring, it's cumbersome, you have to log into many different places, maybe you have to visit a bank branch, etc. Our vision is basically to enable people to get a holistic view of all your finances in one place. Wow. And actually managing that money, or managing the money from that interface.
The financial home, as we heard before.
You can say like that.
Yeah.
And we provide this technology to banks. Okay. So we work with players like Nordea, integrated into their core mobile banking app. We work with ABN AMRO. We've started a standalone app called Grip in Holland, which is basically a white label of our own app that we started out with a couple of years back. We work with BNP Paribas and Klarna that are now turning into be a bank, for example. And we're launching that all across Europe now. So we're helping them with account aggregation and personal finance management.
Okay, so basically what we all heard before, the thing of ecosystem banking or platform banking, the thing of data and the usage of data, the customer touch points, and so on and so forth. Everything is more or less covered. And of course, the technical or the technological side and the whole digitization. Is this all combined with your product?
It's not all combined. It's not all combined. We don't do everything. We have a very clear purpose. I mean, we want people to consolidate and view their finances in one place. Okay. And we want to enable banks to sell products in a data-driven way, using that information. We've done this for 6 years. So we have aggregated information. We not only aggregate PSD2 data, but investment data, savings accounts, mortgages, it could be other loans. We pool that information into one place, and we enable banks to say, let's say Nordea, for example, you connect an SEB account in the Nordea app. That's a savings account with 0% interest rate, let's say. They can send you a push notification saying, we see that you have 10,000 euros on a 0 interest rate savings account. Do you want to transfer the money to us instead? Okay. Click here. So it's a very clear purpose. The purpose is to sell more products for the banks and drive engagement for the users.
Okay, that's basically we were talking about best practice example. Is this, for instance, something you would recommend German banks to do as well? Or what's your take on the whole PSD2 opportunity and how can banks unlock their potential on this?
I think it's already happening, right? Okay. I mean, a lot of German banks have multi-banking functionalities, even though not to the full extent. I think it's fair to just give some background. I mean, PSD2 is not driving the development. It's rather a product of the development. The customer demand has been there for quite some time, and we've seen that in other industries where everything should be digital. You want everything to be available at the touch of a button. Why should it have to be so hard to view your entire financial situation and know how much do you actually have to spend? Are you covered by the right insurances, for example, etc. And what I mean is that development and that demand has been prevalent for quite some time, which is why players like Revolut, who I actually heard at the conference the other week, are gaining 8,000 to 10,000 customers each day.
Wow.
And we usually talk about that with our banks. It must have been very frustrating to be a banker the past 50 years, because the only way you actually get a new customer is you wait for your current customers to have kids. regardless of how good your products are, how much effort you put into it, people are so loyal to their current bank, so it doesn't matter. You won't get new products. Now what's happening is that this market is being unlocked, and you can actually transfer money outside of your bank. You can bank with anyone, anywhere. And it's much more about who has the best customer experience.
This corresponds with the thing said before, the thing about brand and trust. I mean, this is what banks actually have, right? So if it's not about the technology and all the knowledge that you guys gathered over the last 6 years, it should be about this when it comes to core competencies. So basically, what would you recommend a bank to do at the moment? For instance, a German bank, when it comes to technological upgrades in their business.
I mean, the banks have a couple of things we're very envious about. I mean, the trust being one of them, and the customer relationship being another. Tink doesn't have that. I know you have a smart home solution company, so when you Google Tink in Germany, for example, that's the first thing that comes up. We don't do smart home solutions.
Smart finance
people know about Commerzbank when you talk about that, and other banks, of course, and have a very clear brand understanding and trust sharing their information with them. I would recommend, I mean, it's hard for me. I can talk about, I work daily with Nordea and ABN AMRO, for example, what they are doing. And to them, it's a lot about bypassing legacy tech systems, for example, internal security reviews. Maybe it doesn't have to be digitalizing a process before you launch a product. We spoke about that briefly earlier.
Sure.
Mortgage as an example. In Sweden, we have a mortgage switching feature where you can challenge your rate, mortgage rate. You can get an instant offer based on your transaction details. If you choose to accept it, we take you through the whole KYC process from A to Z. You sign at the end with your finger on the screen, and then that gives us, as a provider, the power of attorney to actually switch the mortgage for you. So the interface towards the customer is digital, but there's still a lot of manual work in the background.
Sure.
And we have a robot pen in the office doing this, imitating the signature.
Okay.
I would recommend not being afraid of launching new products and testing and iterating like we heard before. It's a lot about trying what works and figuring out this doesn't work, take it off the market again, move forward, and not being bound by internal procedures in some cases, because that slows down a lot.
Talking about slowing down,
Okay.
and when it comes to actual customer cases you did, what were the biggest roadblocks? Because I guess we can talk about the optimal solution you offer, and that is all shiny and good. And I'm a startup guy myself, so I believe you. I know this is working. But what is the biggest possible threat when it comes to cooperating with you as a startup, as a bank or an insurer or whatsoever?
I'd actually like to start before the collaboration. Okay. So I mean, Tink is a fintech enabler. You can say normally there are two types of fintechs, right? Challengers and enablers. We enable banks. We work together with banks. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a business. But then there are challengers. Regardless of that, some banks view us as challengers. So we have we're starting uphill in trying to convince them that we're actually there to help out. So that's the first thing. That said, I think internally in the bank, it's much more important than what's being prioritized at the moment, involving risk people, involving compliance people, involving other operations people in the commercial discussions from the get-go. That's super important, because sometimes the roadblock could be that the internal security view takes 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
A cloud approval process can take 6 months. If you want to store the data elsewhere, etc. A lot of these internal things where the product organization and the digital banking teams are very interested in pushing this forward very fast, but they can't. But we see that it helps a lot when you put all these people in the room together. You explain how the technology works firsthand.
It's almost like an agile sprint.
Yeah, but long cases. I mean, best case, ABN AMRO went live in 90 days from contract signing. So they basically
describe that process. That would interest me the most.
That was actually, as I mentioned, a white label of our app.
Okay.
So they said, they came to us, that was our first enterprise customers. They came to us and said, we would like to use your app, or we want the same functionality in Holland. Can you do it for us? Back then, we were a B2C company, so we only had our own app in Sweden. And we said, we don't know, let's look into it. I think a half a year later, we decided, yeah, well, let's do it. And then when we did it, we signed the contract, and they were live in 90 days. So we did the front end, we did the back end integration, etc. And that's still live today in Holland. Now we're handed over the code to them, so they are driving the project. But I mean,
oh no! Why did you do that? It will fail. No, I'm just kidding. We'll see about that.
I mean, ABN AMRO is a very fast-moving organization in that sense, and maybe it's because they're Dutch. I mean, Swedish people like consensus first.
Okay.
Dutch people are more driven.
Talking about Nordea, this is basically the actual B2B case that stands out, right? How was the process there to get a little bit of insight on how that worked and how much time that took?
So we're working on it right now, actually, and I can't tell you exactly how much time things take. But it's a completely different animal. What they are doing is taking the tink technology with aggregation, payment initiation, and personal finance management, and including it into their own core mobile banking app in 4 markets.
Okay.
So all of Nordics. That's a big project. I think they have, 8 teams working with mobile banking at some point, or digital banking in different cases. We were in one of them, obviously conflicting initiatives, etc. So it's a lot about the internal procedures that take time, but that we can help out. When you put it into the tink container instead, and you work with tink, then you can bypass that. And that ties back to what I said, not being afraid of actually, it's about having the best technology if you do it yourself or if you work with someone else. I mean, Klarna, one of the most tech-savvy companies in the world, would never settle for anything but having the best technology.
Sure.
And in our case, it's outsourcing is to us, but in other cases, they do it in-house instead.
Okay. And when it comes to the topic of, when we first talked, we had this little briefing talk, I was asking instantly about, oh my God, it's about a digital identity, is there blockchain involved? And you were like, well, no. Why isn't it, basically? And I think it corresponds a little bit with the with the answer before.
Why blockchain is not part of it? I mean, blockchain is also, fintech is such a broad topic. Blockchain is also such a broad topic. I think it's a lot about tying back to what is the actual use case. Many banks and many fintechs, for that matter, try to do everything at once and try to push like this instead of taking one very clear customer journey or use case and making that work in the best sense. Now, if blockchain would be a part of that, then you can evaluate that in that case. But I don't see that you should have blockchain in everything just for the sake of it.
If it makes sense.
If it makes sense, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. So I guess in order that we have some banks in the, here around, who's from a bank? Please raise your hand. Okay, that's cool. I'd like to start perhaps some questions from from you guys. Who has a question for Mikael regarding what Tink is doing and how this can actually help your bank? Come on, banks. This must be something really interesting. We talked about data, we talked about aggregation. Okay, if you're not into this game, I'll proceed with this. So if you have a question, just raise your hand or make a sound or whatever, and we can bring it in here. So if you were, we talked about PSD2 and all the data aggregation that you guys push a little bit, or that you offer a solution. What would you recommend in general in terms of banking and the whole PSD2 thing on how to stay relevant? That's actually the topic of the talk. What would you recommend banks to do?
PSD2 is just a first step. Now we're talking about payment accounts. So it basically allows you to bank anywhere with anyone, but it's just a very small scope of your entire finances. I believe that in a couple of years we will see other regulation following, covering payment savings accounts, other type of loans, as we mentioned, maybe mortgages. It's about being open to that development and being open to what customers are actually wanting to see. Now we talk about PSD2 application areas. Is anything from all of a sudden you as a bank have a lot of transaction details about your customer that you didn't have before. You can now use that to credit score better, to use it in risk assessment internally. You can also use it to push products. Or in retail, I mean, Amazon, for example, when you buy something, they could easily ask you, do you want to check your balance account or balance on your account before you check out, for example? If that would be savings accounts as well, they could say, do you want us to transfer money before? And then you manage your finances in that interface. That's where we're heading in many cases. And I believe it's about being open to that, to being open to it, to new developments, and acting very, very fast. We've heard it before, but I strongly believe in the Darwinism approach, and it's not big versus small, it's fast versus slow. And we see, but it's also about market timing. Some solutions, they're premature in the market, and it has to come at a certain time. What we've seen in Sweden, for example, we have this instant payment app called Swish. It's a collaboration between the banks. I think you have something similar in Germany where you can transfer money instantly.
We're working on that.
Between banks. And what we've seen there is it took a long time for it to really take off. It was live for 4 or 5 years before it maybe grew 5% in user base every year. And then it just took off. And now everyone is using it, basically, in our age group.
Yeah.
And it takes time. And we heard it before. It's like doing insurances for 150 years and then expecting it to be digital all of a sudden. That's not how it's going to work. But you still have to have the confidence and the patience to be there when it happens.
I mean, it's kind of logical, right? I mean, over the years, all the insurers, all the banks developed a certain skill set in terms of serving a customer, having products, and so on and so forth. And now you're talking about digitization, which is kind of new to them. So basically, why don't they rely or why don't they trust providers like you or fintechs in general? And we heard it before. Okay, there's a question. We heard before from Tarek Al-Wazir that the whole collaboration thing between fintech and banks is the main key for success here. So basically, you're just, or not just, but you are a use case for data-driven business models and on the other hand side, a technological improvement when it comes to digitization. So it's a win-win basically, right? If I understand correctly.
Yeah.
Cool, that's good. We have a question over there.
Yeah, sure. Michael Uniman, Bird and Bird. You mentioned that PSD2 opened up payment accounts to your solution and that there's more regulation to come. Do you see already developments kind of without regulation in Europe where this open banking movement is going, is heading? Are there commercial solutions already?
Yes. No, so just to provide background, Tink has aggregated information the way now PSD2 stipulates you should for 6 years. And we've done it through the non-public mobile banking APIs. So it's not screen scraping, but it's actually using the same APIs that the bank apps use, using that information to fetch data and also send transaction or payments. If we take our own app that we've had live in Sweden for 6 years as an example, you can gather any type of bank account, loans or investments, into our third-party app, transfer money in between, and pay your bills, for example. So you get your e-invoices directly to your to that app. You can pay that. So that's as a third party. We also work with an online broker in Sweden, for example. That's another use case. They have investment portfolios, and investment accounts, that's their primary business model. What they now allow is that their primary competitor, users or customers of that, can actually manage their investments from our customers' interface. Transfer or buy stocks, transfer funds, and essentially acquiring customers that way. So in terms of asset classes, I see that savings accounts, investment portfolios, mortgages, and other type of loans, they are very close at hand, and PSD2 is just an opener towards this. I think PSD2 is very important, though, because what we've seen is that there are some really progressive, but then the majority are moving very slow. So I think what PSD2 is going to enable is that everyone has to move forward. And standardization is super important in this. I mean, I know you have this FinTS standard here in Germany. There are other standards across all of Europe that we have to work with. But PSD2 will enable some kind of standardization in this. But when you have that in place, it's very easy to actually just extend the data scope, easier than implementing in the beginning.
Cool. Does that answer the question? Perfect. Are there any other questions in the room? I guess not. So we're perfectly in time.
Fantastic.
But let me get this straight for me as a little summary. I guess we talked about an innovative solution that is actually use case based on a regulation basis that is there, which cannot be denied. And so basically, it's more or less for banks about to decide whether they want to be in the driver's seat at the moment and to move really fast and trust, and we had that topic early on, trust providers like you to get the job done in the first place and then build on that, right?
I'd say actually that, I mean, all the banks have to do something in this space when it comes to aggregation and payment initiation due to PSD2. So, I mean, that will be a hygiene factor in this sense. Then your question was, how do you want to stay relevant? How do you compete with Instagram, for example, when the people are on the way home on the bus, why should they check? They should check your bank account instead of Instagram, if that's your vision. Or how do I sell as many insurances as I can? Or how do I get my current customers to open savings accounts? It's more about deciding this is the type of use case I want, and then talking to us about the kind of technology that you need for it, because banks are turning more into IT providers, but it's not their core skill yet. They are very good at, and they have the product infrastructure and all the backbone needed to supply those products. But we can help, cord cut some internal processes and accelerate it very, very much.
So that they will be faster and beating the slower.
Correct.
Mikael, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man.